Hey there, this is James. So 2020's gotten off to quite a wild start. We've got the Saudi oil meltdown, we've got the stock market meltdown, we've got the coronavirus. Wow, it's just incredible. So what's going on? What's causing all this? Well, of course, many of you know that I'm a Vedic astrologer, so I'm going to answer that question from the astrological perspective. And this isn't to say that astrology is causing it, because astrology is just simply a symbol system that reflects what's going on. In any case, there's a lot going on from the astrological perspective. And many of you also know that I give a talk every year called World Predictions. I've been doing this for 30 years. And in that talk, I cover the charts of countries and the world and leaders and so on, and show how Vedic astrology reflects the trends and events of our times. Well, in the past decade, I've been focusing on 2020. And all of these things that are happening right now have been predicted in the lectures that I've given over the years. So I'm going to share with you just a couple of clips here of these past predictions showing the trends that we're going through right now. And then after we look at this, we'll take a look at how Vedic astrology can shed some light on how to approach these things and put it in a context that'll maybe make it easier to understand. Anyway, I always refer to one of my teachers in India, who is Swami Shivanandamurti, who has been encouraging me to talk about world predictions. This field of astrology is called mundane astrology. And in fact, if it weren't for Swami Shivanandamurti, I probably wouldn't be doing this anymore, because there was a time about in the mid-90s when I first met him, when I was really thinking about, the fact I've been giving these talks, and and a lot of it was about scary stuff, and I wasn't sure if that was all really the best thing to put our attention on. Is this really good to all get together and look at all the bad stuff that might happen in the world? And so I was thinking, maybe this isn't a good idea. And I asked him, he said, no, you should absolutely talk about this. And in fact, nowadays he's really into it, and he just thinks that mundane astrology is one of the most important fields of astrology, more important, he says, in his opinion, than doing charts for people, individual charts. He says, that's good, that's fine, that can help people, but he says that looking at the world's situation can help the masses sort of find some kind of context and some kind of symbolic system through which they can understand what's going on. And it helps us all collectively to, understand how we're evolving together. Anyhow, in that respect, he's also, Swami Shivanandamurti is a great astrologer. Before he got enlightened many years ago, he was a full-time astrologer, and very, very well known, and really excellent. But nowadays he doesn't practice astrology, he just encourages other people to do it. But he's been talking about 2020 as the big time, the big time as, the year to look at for challenges, a challenging period. 2020 based on a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction that's taking place. Okay, so this is the part where you want to take a deep breath and just kind of relax a little bit. Don't worry about kind of the dramatic kind of qualities here, but you remember the Spanish flu?
Don't worry about it.
Do you remember the Spanish flu? Okay, and I talked about this last year, for those of you who came to my lecture last year. What's interesting is if you go back and you ask yourself, what was the biggest event in history that killed the most amount of people in the least amount of time? Most people would think, well, what was it?
Plague.
It wasn't. It was the Spanish flu. The plague killed tons of people, but it did it over decades. But Spanish flu did it during the Spanish flu, 500 million people in the world got the Spanish flu. And 1/3 of those died. Actually, no, sorry. 1/5 of them, 100 million died. That was 6% of the population of the world at that time. Okay? That's how many people died of the Spanish flu. But they call it the forgotten pandemic because it took place right on the heels of World War II, or World War I. And everybody was all so traumatized by the war, and so the war kind of ended. It started in the trenches, and one of the reasons it killed so many people was because it was in the trenches, and because they, couldn't take them to normal hospitals. They would just take them off to this tent somewhere and let them sit, and they would die. But in fact, this was a pandemic that just really swept the whole world, and then it just burned itself out in 2 years. Okay. If you go back to the plague, okay, in France in 1345, when it hit France, it took place at a Jupiter-Saturn-Mars conjunction and Neptune in Aquarius. Okay, and then also as a Pluto K2, a K2 Pluto conjunction as well at that time. Okay, well, we're going to have a Jupiter-Saturn-Mars-Neptune. Actually, a Jupiter-Saturn-Mars conjunction, and also K2 and Pluto in Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020 in January. We're going to have a Jupiter conjunction with Saturn in December. Yeah, and there also K2 is going to be involved in this one as well. So I'm not saying we're going to have the plague or even the Spanish flu. All I'm saying is that these conjunctions at that period are challenging conjunctions. They've happened before at challenging periods. Now, interestingly, the ones that took place at the time of the plague, it was in Aquarius, and Aquarius is particularly susceptible to health issues. Okay. And in the constellation of Shatabisha, which is a nakshatra, which in Sanskrit means 100 physicians or 100 medicines. Okay, so it was specific to that sort of thing at that time. Whereas when we're looking at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, actually in April there's going to be K2 getting in on the mixture there as well. That conjunction is going to be in Capricorn, or actually in the nakshatra of Uttara Ashada nakshatra, which is symbolized by the tusk of an elephant. And its Shakti is the power to create an unstoppable victory, which implies the idea of struggling or fighting. So I think this is along a different line. However, the idea of epidemics is part of what's kind of going on with the patterns that are kind of shaping up here. So, we're hitting on some of those areas, and this all sounds so dramatic and all of that, but when things like this actually happen, life still goes on.
Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has got an interesting horoscope for the following reason. And when it went into its Saturn subperiod, during the moon's major period, the Saturn, see, every one of the major cycles will have a subperiod for all the planets within it. And during the moon's major period, the Saturn subperiod was the first oil embargo that took place back in 1973. Now, Saturn rules oil in astrology in general. Okay, so the Iranians have been able to benefit through oil. Their chart is ruled by Saturn, so obviously they can benefit through oil. But it turns out that in their Saturn's sub-periods, for some reason, this has been a time when oil has been down. That's because Saturn's in the 12th house in the horoscope, which gives challenges in different ways. having all those planets in Capricorn in the first house, and Venus involved in a really good combination, and another one of Saturn's signs. Both of the signs ruled by Saturn. Most of their planets are in signs ruled by Saturn and show the capacity to gain wealth. But Saturn itself is in the 12th house, a house of uncertainties and losses. And that was a time when the oil embargo took place. Oil went down. Then Mars major period, the Saturn subperiod, took place in 1981, and the output was reduced due to lower demand and other sources, and OPEC's share of the world output was reduced to 30% of the world output. So that was another major downturn in their production of oil. In 1993, this is during the first Iraq War, Kuwait, when Kuwait was invaded, and during that time, the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Kuwait created this big stoppage of oil once again. So Saudi Arabia took over their portion of the production, but this was a time when oil production was down big time. And then in Jupiter, which was the next major period, the Saturn subperiod was 2008, when we had the largest reduction of output historically. So in every single Saturn subperiod, we've had a major crisis with oil. Well, those are subperiods. In 2020, notice the correlation, 2020, Saturn major period starts, the 19-year period, the big kahuna, the big major period of Saturn. That's when that begins in 2020. So there probably will be something connected with oil at that time, and Saudi Arabia will probably, be having problems with that. And also, it's in the 12th house in their chart, which suggests that, this is also reflecting that there are issues going on worldwide as far as oil goes.
Rahu, Jupiter. So right now, the country is in Rahu, Jupiter. And I think what that represents is economic uncertainty. I think that, the country is going to show signs of the economy slowing here as this goes on. I think there might be a possible correction in the stock market between May of 2019 and June of 2020. It doesn't have to happen right in May of 2019, but anywhere between May of 2019 and June of 2020. And it's possible that there could be a recession that would follow that. In the chart for the U.S., we're in Rahu Jupiter from June of 2018 to November 2020. And that shows, Jupiter's in the 7th house, and that's one of the houses of business, and that can show, business perking along on a certain level, okay? Saturn also aspects it, so there can be some moments there where things take a downturn as well. But we've already been in it since June of 2018, and so far, so good. There is some prosperity taking place. Okay, so now when we go to the chart for the S&P, then it says from May of 2019, notice that is in the last section of the Rahu cycle for the country, from May of 2019 to June of 2020, and it doesn't have to be right in the beginning of that time. But we've already realized some of the expansive energy of Jupiter, and this influence can just indicate that, maybe along in there, mixed in with the expansive prosperity part of it, that we'll have a downturn, that it will go well for maybe the first half of the period, and then in the second half of the period, we have things kind of turned down a little bit. And whether it'll be a dramatic thing right in May, or whether it'll take till, I think it's more likely it'll be in the period, in the last quarter of the year, something like that.
Okay, first let's do just a little bit of damage control here. You might have noticed that I compared the time that we're in right now to the time of the Spanish flu and the time of the plague, and that's just, that was just
there were some aspects of that time that were similar but not identical. And I hope that you heard the other part where I described that the aspects that are taking place right now are not nearly as sort of challenging and pernicious as the ones that were taking place at those times. Okay? So that said, this is a contagious virus. That's the thing about it. It's very contagious. And if you get it, you get, a glorified version of the flu. And, for some people that might be, more difficult in the sense of getting pneumonia. And for some people can die. But people have died from the flu, for ages. But the thing we have to do is kind of listen to what's going on in terms of hearing from the CDC and various agencies and scientific sources that tell us what the nature of this is, and be clear about its nature. The contagious part of it, absolutely, it seems reflected in the chart. That's why it's a pandemic. But the thing is that we have to look at this clearly, and that's how Vedic astrology can kind of help us a little bit to sort of place this in a context and hopefully remove some of the fear. Because one of the qualities of this pandemic, like a lot of pandemics, is that there's a fear factor, and that's clearly shown in the chart. Anyway, astrology can give some help here, and if we look at the theory of karma, which is the basis of astrology, the theory of karma basically is something that shows us that we incur impressions from the past and we carry those into our life, and then we shed those karmas and we experience the fruits of those karmas on a schedule. And that schedule is the horoscope. The horoscope is a map of our karma. And astrology is the practical application of the theory of karma. So essentially, by looking at the chart, we can tell about certain trends and events in a person's life. The horoscope isn't a crystal ball. Astrologers can't see specific things that happen at specific times. You will go into business with John Smith on exactly this day. You'll sign the document. That's psychic stuff. And, I'm not a psychic, and psychics can do that, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with it. It can be helpful for some people, but that's not what astrology does. Astrology is a more broad type of intuitive science that basically shows the map of our karma. And that can also include our collective map of our karma. That's what mundane astrology does, is it gives this idea of our collective karma. The chart of the United States shows how we together go through certain ups and downs in the country. And the chart for various countries does the same thing. In each one of those countries, they have a certain collective karma. Anyway, the idea here, the takeaway here is that astrology shows us that life goes in ups and downs. Now, you don't need an astrologer to tell you this. You could ask your mother. If your mother had her 2 feet on the ground, she probably would have told you, "Don't worry, honey, this'll pass." You're worried about the fact that your friends don't like you in school, but that'll pass. You go through this stuff. Astrology is like a bigger mother, that just gives you maybe a little bit more elaborate description and astrological symbols that'll help you to understand things. But in fact, that's the takeaway from astrology. Life goes in ups and downs, and when you have an up, the idea is to not get too wound up in it, because for every up there's a down. So be ready for the down and take each of those in stride. And when you get the down period and it's not as pleasant, then just meet that with equanimity. And that brings us to the point. Equanimity is the whole point of astrology. The whole thing is in this cultivation of equanimity. Equanimity is basically a sense of detachment, a sense of neutrality. Going through a really pleasant period, fine, great, enjoy it, but don't get wound up in it. Don't hold on to it. Realize it's just a mirage. It'll come and go. It won't last forever. And then when you're going through a difficult time, don't believe that either. When you're going through the difficult time, keep that sense of equanimity. Remember that your sense of peace and tranquility and happiness comes from within yourself. Anyway, astrology can help us to understand the timings and the overall warps and woofs of up periods or down periods. This one happens to be one that's gotten a lot of people worried. So if you're interested in finding out more about what's happening with the astrological influences and the coronavirus and the stock market and the U.S. and even a little bit about the elections, I'm going to be giving a talk on Sunday, March 29th at 10 a.m. Pacific. If you're tuning in from other places, make sure you do the conversion of the time, and that will be available on my website. You can look at the website to find out more about it. And in the meantime, the idea is to just keep an even mind. Don't get wound up about all this stuff. Don't get sucked into the fear. Just keep a sense of peace. The best way that you can do that is to meditate. Meditation is probably the most important practice, I think, that anyone can do. If there's any remedy or flu shot or anything like that for this, I think meditation is it. Okay, I hope that helps. Take care. Namaste.